Hooray! Well, welcome to this class. Again, on photography and image manipulation. I'm going to begin this by showing you, we're talking about bitmaps, and we're going to talk about the language of photography, as I said. I forgot to record it, guys, so if you're watching this in playback, you'll know why this is a shortened beginning. But I did want to show you, we were talking about how text files can be searched, how Google search works, but I did want to show you just how advanced some of the APIs are. That's an application programming interface, so anybody can use this, right? I wanted to show you how advanced some of the artificial intelligence is in terms of identifying things, right? So this is the Google's Cloud Vision API, and you try the API by simply loading something in here. I'm going to load something. Finally, 1 second. Let's try this again. Okay, so there's a picture it's loading, you see? Let's see what it says. I am not a robot. It is looking at the picture. Now look what it just did.
No way.
Way. It identified all the faces, first of all, right? And then look, it says these are happy people, right? It's very unlikely that they're wearing anything on their head. It's very unlikely that it's blurred. I'm glad to hear that. It's very unlikely that they're showing sorrow or anger, right? That's face one. Oh, that's face one, sorry. This is face two, same deal. Oh, look, roll, tilt, pan. And the confidence level is 98%. Okay, face three, alas, is blurred. Too bad. Face four, but that's because they're moving. Now look at this. What objects did it find? People, luggage, tops, belts. It found a belt, right? Dresses. Anything else? Oh, look, it's an event. It's a photograph. It's a ceremony. It's a wedding reception. I mean, come on, guys, really? Any text? Nah, there's no. Oh, James Roberts Photography, because my logo's on there. Dominant colors. How do you like that one? And safe search. Is this adult? No. Is it spoof? No. Is it racy? No. So this is all available to any product and any program that wants to do this, right? This is astonishing to me that it could tell all these things, right? From a picture. Okay, now maybe it's cheating by looking at wedding, in the text to get the label. But I don't think it is. I honestly don't think it is, right? Should we try a new one? I'll do one more for you.
Question. So right now, if I were to search for, let's say, a wedding picture, and this was published, eventually it will come across this type of picture.
No, not necessarily. This is a programming API, Harry. So if I want to build a product that identifies happy people from sad people, I can do that with this. Okay. I don't even have to code it. Google makes this available to people, right? This is public. But this is how image search works, right? It's not searching anything in there but patterns, right? So it's going to do the same thing. Look, it identifies all the faces, all the objects, right? Now these are, I guess you could say that's pretty easy to do. It's pretty amazing, right? Oh, the bride's in this one. Did you notice?
Yeah. It
knew she was the bride. How did it know? I don't know, but it did. Right? So
no one else would wear that dress ever.
Well, for sure, but what if your bride's, I mean, the fact is, what do you mean that dress? It's just a bunch of it's just a bunch of pixels. What dress?
Those pixels would never consider that way in any other situation.
That's not true. If somebody gets baptized, they wear a white gown. If somebody is in a choir, they might, graduating, all kinds of reasons people might wear white, right? I mean, I'm just, and I'm not disagreeing with you. I mean, if you get all the rest of this right, and look, it's an 87% sure thing, not 100%. They're most sure that it's a photograph, so that's pretty good. And they're most sure that these people are happy. Okay, But it's very, very interesting to me that face 3 is the bride's. She's really happy, right? Do you see the difference? What's interesting to me, though, is it's actually looking at this and categorizing it, right? And not understanding. There's no consciousness there. But again, it's the capability of putting all of this information in a database about a thing that has no data. Like, this is not anything but, as we said last week, bitmap data. Okay? So what the computer is doing is essentially making judgments about this that have never been able to be made before, except by people, right? Now, the whole thing about this is that I can put 1,000 pictures in here. I can write a program to put 1,000,000 pictures in here, and it could analyze an event. So let's pretend I had a bunch of pictures from yesterday in Washington, or in Minnesota, or in Portland, or California, or LA, right? I could tell without even knowing what had happened that there were a bunch of angry people out there, right? So I don't think I can I paste something in here? Let me try. I want to show you. This is astonishing. Drag image or browse from your computer. I can't drag a pasted image. So you see what I'm saying, though, right? This is amazing to me. Absolutely amazing. Because this is a brand new thing sort of this year. Okay? This is not something that has ever been available before. Right?
It's not free though.
What's that?
It's not free though. I'm on here now and it's telling me to put my credit card down.
Yeah, they want your credit card, but they won't charge you unless you use it like 1 billion times a day.
Fair
So
enough.
it's pretty cheap, given that you didn't have to code it.
Yeah, no, that's pretty fair.
They sell it for sure. I'm trying to think if there's anything else here.
I'm trying to figure out what is the benefit of this particular product, other than being able to determine what the picture is telling us.
Seriously? So what don't you get about that benefit?
No, I think it's extremely powerful, and it's able to sort of analyze and really mathematically determine what each formation is. However, for, let's say, a search and conquering basis.
You're thinking about it all the wrong way. It's not about search.
Okay, so I'm tagging it to the wrong thing.
Yeah,
okay.
This is Google Cloud. This is AI and machine learning. So
okay.
I'll give you a scenario where this would be incredible. You own a coffee shop, okay? And you have a camera in your coffee shop that takes a picture every 30 seconds of all your customers.
Okay.
At the end of the day, those pictures get fed into a computer. You don't even have to know about it. And the next day, or whenever you're awake, you can see how many happy customers you had, how many sad customers you had, how much of their coffee they drank, whether it was one person serving them that always had the angry customer, and you didn't have to do anything.
Mm-hmm.
But look at their faces. It's sentiment analysis for images.
Yeah, it's actually awesome.
It's astonishing. Now, could this be misused? Absolutely. Could it be, used for all kinds of helpful things? Absolutely, it could. And that leads us to the technology of things that's always kind of neutral. It depends on whose hands it's in. But that's the thing for this. It's not really for image search, although this is how image search works. If you say, I want to see pictures of cats, the way it used to work was they would look for the web page that said cats and assume there were pictures of cats on that page. These days, they can actually look at, does the picture actually represent a cat or not?
Hmm.
And that's a subtle but dramatic difference. I think here's another way that it's been used, actually. The Vision API has been used to detect patterns in, and I learned about this, a public case, so this is fine, patterns in people who are about to go blind with a certain kind of diabetic retinal problem. And it's almost impossible to diagnose by a doctor. But the computer can actually look at a retinal scan and give a percentage probability and when the person might go blind based on the patterns of retinal images that it sees. right?
Mm.
This is astonishing. So now you can actually be diagnosed with this thing before it happens, which means you can get it fixed before it happens, right? Once it happens, it's pretty bad, right? So patterns, the ability to see patterns and to process them as if they're text is absolutely astonishing. It's astonishing. Which leads us to tonight, and we're going to talk about sort of the language of media, right, of film and photography in particular, right? So I want to start with this. I want to start with composition, right? The very first thing that you look at when you look at an image is how it's composed. What's in the foreground? What's in the background, right? What's in focus? What isn't in focus, right? Now, those are all photographic things, right? You know, you tend to look at things that are in focus and you tend not to look at things that are out of focus. If there are, in fact, sharp and blurry differences, right? But more than just being in focus, more than just the color involved, although all of those are important, how you actually compose the frame in photography is almost the very first rule of how an image makes meaning. So I want to show you this one too. Now we'll stay with this for a second. Okay. There's, you know, from the very first photographs, where you put something in a frame actually signals what you're trying to communicate. Okay. Now this is true for presentations as well. It's true for actually any static graphic. And that's the first thing about photography. It's what it shares with painting, right? It's static, right? When you look at a photograph, it's static. Now I know that there are moving photographs on your iPhone, which are basically little movies. I know there are animated GIFs, which are little animations. They're not always photographic, but there are. There's memes that get generated out of that. I know all that stuff. But when I talk about classical photography, I'm talking about something that's static, okay? But I'm also talking about something that is time-oriented. So here's the weird thing about photography. It takes a slice of whatever is in front of the camera at a fraction of a second and makes that thing static. So if it's a not moving subject, that's great. If it's a moving subject, it's also made static. And you can play around with that and get blurring effects and all kinds of other things, all because the camera is both a renderer of static information and a capturer, if you like, of time-based information. Okay? So that's the fundamental aspect of photography that it shares with painting. It's static, but it also is dynamic. So how long do you think it takes a master artist to paint, to create a portrait of someone? Right? What do you think?
2 minutes.
2 minutes. Come on, 2 minutes. Of course not 2 minutes. Of course, it can be days or weeks or months. You know, and the classic, you know, Leonardo da Vinci painting the Mona Lisa, taking, you know, the subject goes and sits and sits and sits, and there's drawings, and then there's draft drawings, and there's changes, then there's his patented painting techniques, right? All to produce this painting or portrait, you know, is the exact opposite of photography, especially today, where it is essentially click and it's done, right? Even more, another thing that I've never talked about before, but I'm going to now, is that movie cameras are so good that at this point, it's kind of a toss-up whether you take a fraction of a second, you know, intentionally, or you just let the camera roll and then you take the one frame that's really good, right, to produce a photo. It's pretty weird, right, how much digital manipulation and image capture has changed the medium. However, the thing about digital media is you still play by the rules, at first at least, of the original medium. So we are still talking about sort of the classical rules of photography. So let's talk about how you put things in a frame. Now, this one you've probably heard of before, right? The rule of thirds. This is a classic way of actually composing a frame or statically. It's not just photographic, although a lot of photographers use it. A lot of movie makers use it. So the next time you watch a movie, watch where somebody puts their head and where the character's looking, right? If they're looking off to a side, they will be on the opposite side, like this dog is, right? You know, this is a classically composed rule of thirds picture with the most prominent point of interest in focus and at the intersection of that upper two line of thirds. So to make a compositional grid, you divide the picture into three, right? Vertically and horizontally. And the most interesting elements are at the intersection points. There, 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 and there. The dog is also looking into the space, which looks good, right? If the dog was turned the other way with all this negative space on the left and the dog was looking at the right, it would be much more unnerving, believe it or not. In fact, the only unsettling thing about this picture of the dog is the fact that there's a diagonal line that runs from top to bottom. Now, it's very pleasing in some ways, but it's unsettling, right? It gives it some dynamic quality that it wouldn't have if the horizon was simply flat, right? So it's interesting because, you know, these rules play with the way we think of things. If you go to the next one, right, there's no grid on there, but if you draw those grid in your mind, where's the boat? Right on the intersection of the lower left horizontal and vertical grid. That's where your eye goes, right? Now this one is much more, I don't know, static in a way because of the horizon, right? There's a very strong horizon there. And there's also the mountains which break up the horizon. But it's quite interesting that in both of these cases, there's something in the foreground, something in the middle ground, something in the background, and they have different feelings. This is very placid. The dog portrait is quite dynamic, heroic even, I would say, right? If you put Lassie in there and Timmy in a well somewhere else, you know, it's quite a heroic sort of thing. And if you didn't get that joke, it's okay. I'm old. And then look at this. The cheetah's doing the same thing, right? Looking into the space, into the negative space. So when you take your own pictures, this is a really good way of upping your game right away. Just thinking in your head, where's the rule of thirds here? Are people looking into the frame? Are they looking out of the frame? If they're looking out of the frame, what are they looking at? And is that the kind of thing you want to show, or do you want to have something a little more statically composed? The same for this picture of a girl, right? She's looking right at the camera. There's, again, a strong horizon, and she's right on the intersection of that rule of thirds grid. It's interesting, too, because it looks like there's a path behind her, and that actually gives some depth. Do you see what I mean? There's a little path going behind her around to the corner there, and that gives her some path. It makes her look like she's on a trajectory, even though this is static, right? Now, there's lots of examples, lots and lots of examples in Google Images. If you just Google rule of thirds, tons and tons and tons. But that's not the only compositional thing that you can use in photography. In fact, wherever you place the frame, you're always going to be looking at the subject and the background, right? It depends what you're trying to tell the story of. So here's a different compositional way of looking at things when Zoom gets out of my way. Thank you, Zoom. Sorry, one sec. I will get rid of that in a second. Okay, so here's a balanced set. Here's balanced composition, right? So look at this. This is not the rule of thirds at all, right? This balanced composition, architectural balance, shows that you've got something that is absolutely symmetrical if I divide it in two. And the interesting part is that it's not symmetrical if I divide it horizontally in two. This balance, this second picture, is it balanced? Well, yeah, it is in many ways, actually. That while there's a little bit of a difference between the foreground and the back, you know, the sky and the sea, foreground and background, it's actually balanced in terms of light and dark, right? So the light's pretty much in the middle. Your eye is drawn to the light. Your eye is drawn to this big thing in the foreground, which is actually in the intersection of rule of thirds. But the rest of it is very balanced in terms of light and dark. Here's another image for balance, right? You see the symmetries in things when you put them in balance. If this was on rule of thirds, you'd be looking for something to go up those stairs. As it is, you're looking at the stairs. And, you know, this is used again in movies because movies are built up out of balances from photography and composition from photography. There's lots of movies that use static composition. Cinematographers use this to make you feel uneasy or make something look mysterious or make something look balanced, right? So does everybody get that? I mean, we could go into images and you could probably see, look, there's 98 million results. There's another great example of compositional balance, right? Of symmetry, right? Here's 7 musts of great composition. Here's some other ones, right? The light and the dark balance, right? Here's that's actually a rule of thirds and a nice balanced composition, right? So you put the subject right on the intersection of those lines, takes your eye right there. Any questions about that? There's tons of these. The classic would be railroad tracks going off in the distance. Okay, that's one element of photography, just the fact that it takes a moment in time and displays it statically. Let's go to portraits. Now, of course, there's a long tradition of portraiture in painting, right? So the very first thing you have to think about when you're taking a portrait of someone is what kind of portrait is it? Now, I'm not talking about informal pictures or selfies that you take, although I'll give you some tips for selfies in a minute, right? But a classic portrait, right, like these ones by Rembrandt, have a certain element of composition and lighting. You can see that a lot of these, they were done for very rich people, by the way. You know, they're classic, but they're very balanced, right? This is not rule of thirds stuff, although the frame is a proper rectangle, and there are points of interest in the intersection points of thirds. But the more important thing with Rembrandt, and this is such a terrible reproduction, right? I urge you, if you've never seen a Rembrandt or one of the Dutch masters or Italian masters or Renaissance portrait paintings, I urge you to go look at them because they are astonishing, right? In real life, the way the paint actually represents skin tones, facial features, and light is amazing. And it's light that characterizes photography, right? In fact, literally, photography in Greek means light writing or writing with light. So the other element of photography that it shares with painting is the dynamics of lighting, right? In fact, portrait photography is, you know, equally about composition and light. And you need to understand the differences that lighting has on communication. So here's actually, we're not going to go there yet. Here's actually lots of information on lighting setups, right? There's, you know, 7 easy portrait lighting setups in 70 seconds, but there's tons of them, right? 6 portrait lighting patterns every photographer should know. So what have we got here? I'm just going to look because I don't know if I'm every photographer or not, but we'll find out. Oh, good Lord. Okay. The internet is becoming useless. I don't want to see this, right? There's so many, though, that it's not even funny. So let's just go to images, right? Look at all the different types of portrait lighting there is, right? So there's an outline, right? With the light behind and to the left of to the right of the person, right? It's called short light, okay? Here is, what do you know? It's Rembrandt lighting. It looks an awful lot like the same light that Rembrandt used in his portraits, right? And it's identifiable by the shadows. That sounds crazy. How is lighting identified by shadow? But that's exactly what you learn, right? You learn how to make portraits, right? Through lighting. So look at this. This where it says 10 stunning portraits, right? That's a terrible portrait. There's almost no contrast and nothing shaping in the light. But look at this. That's almost a perfect reproduction of the north-facing window light that Rembrandt would have used to create a portrait, right? Oh, and by the way, if you're getting a hint that window light might be a good thing to use for your selfies, it's a very good thing to use for your selfies. And the softer the light, the more flattering it's going to be. So I can age you, or I can take many years off you, depending on what kind of light I use to photograph you. I'm at the point in my life where I can look 20 years older than I am, or 5 years younger than I am, depending on what kind of light is out there. But it's true even for young people, right? If you use the wrong light, you will look literally like a horror, right? And we all know what that means, right? Horror lighting, you've all done that around the campfire, haven't you? How do you make light like that? If you want to look like Frankenstein.
Flashlight right under your chin.
Yeah, the light has to come from below. But what's the other thing about a flashlight?
The lighting's quite intense.
It's intense, but there's something else about it. And this is a key. This is a photographer's secret.
Light of a flashlight?
No.
Is it because it's all concentrated at you? It's not like coming from different angles?
No. So, okay. So the reason it's horror lighting is because it's unnatural light. How often do you see light coming from below you? Right?
That's true.
Right? We're all sort of programmed to have light above us or to the side of us, or even from a computer, maybe coming up softly into your face, but not directly below you. That is an unnatural thing.
Yeah, before about the light on the background.
What's that?
The light pointed at the background.
It's not the light pointed at the background. It's one other thing that most people who've never done professional photography don't clue into. Any other guesses? Okay, here it is. It's the relative size of the light to the subject. What? It's the relative size of the light to the subject that makes this horrific. One of the elements of lighting that is so important for photographers is to control how harsh or soft the light is, right? And there's a rule about it because, again, it's about how harsh or deep the shadows are. That's what creates soft or hard light. And it's all about how small the light source is compared to what you're taking a picture of. So when you put a flashlight underneath your face, how big is your face compared to the bulb in the flashlight? It's a lot bigger, right? So that's a small light source. Okay, now I'm going to reverse this for you. How many of you have taken a family portrait on Mother's Day or Father's Day or some special occasion, and you're out in a parking lot and the sun is directly overhead, and you take a picture and you all look like raccoons? Right? Do you get good pictures?
No, not really.
No, they're terrible. They're terrible. They're the opposite of this, because the sun, believe it or not, by itself is a teeny tiny light source. Right? Now,
Yeah.
it's huge. It's gigantic. But in the sky, 93 million miles away, it's a little tiny flashlight that is pointing directly above you. And when that happens, right? When that happens, it casts the same kind of light as this, only upside down. So your eyebrows become shadow makers. Your nose becomes a shadow, right? And it looks horrible. So the best thing you can do for your family when you're taking a picture is put them in the shade, right? Don't let the sun be overhead, or it will look horrible. Even with great cameras, even with the most expensive camera money can buy. This is much more important than the quality of the camera, right? The quality of the lighting is what makes the quality of the photo. and it's what communicates as well as composition, right? So let me show you. So this lighting on this woman's face, that is taken probably with either a large window, right, with diffuse light, because even sun shining into a window, if you stand away from the window, there's lots of diffuse light, right? Because the window is large compared to your face, right? It's weird the way it works. If a cloud goes in the sky, right? A cloud goes in the sky, it will make the entire sun, right, a diffuse light source, much, much nicer. If it's still overhead, it'll still look weird. You notice how this is kind of off to the side? Off to the side looks good. There's also classic beauty portraits. Let me try this one. Portrait lighting, beauty, Hollywood, 30s. There we go. Yeah, that's perfect. Okay, look at this. That is classic Hollywood glamour light or portrait light. Do you notice it's different than the Rembrandt light? It's above the head, and you can tell that by this little butterfly shadow underneath the nose. And there's a backlight to catch, a catch light to catch the hair, and a reflector to reflect more light into the mask of the face. The only people you light like this are young people, preferably in our culture. It's always feminine. You never light a guy like this. Okay, this is, you know, this is classic Hollywood portraiture, right? So if you want to make somebody look like they're in a movie in the 30s, this is the type of photography, the type of lighting that you use. It's not it's not even so much what they're wearing or even the hairstyles. It's the lighting that identifies it, right? I bet you a lot of these pictures are modern, actually. It's just they have set up the light to give you a glamour look. Now, much more common these days is actually a ring light, right? Where a ring light is a round light. Do you see? You see this round light? So you get and that's a cheap one. Never buy that, right? Because why? Why would that create crappy lighting?
Not a big enough area.
It's not a big enough thing. It's what your dentist used to take pictures of your teeth, right? You never would use something like that. You need a ring light that's large, right? Like this, right? See how much larger that is compared to her face? That will give you a very flat, stylized look on the model. You see there's not much shadow there, right? But it is very even. And for people who are made up, who are very symmetrical, it's an interesting look, right? And people use it, and you can tell that they're using it because they have a ring in their eye, right? You can actually see the ring light. This is a ring light with a couple of other lights. Okay. The largeness of the light source, if you just Google large light source, you will see all of how this works. But it's true, if you have a teeny tiny light source and you point it at somebody, it will look terrible. That's why photographers use these gigantic light boxes, right? Gigantic light boxes. Because relative to the person, the box should be at least their size. Now, like I said, if you don't have $10,000 and you know, beautiful studio lighting, if you can find a window that is that shape and size, it's going to look great. If you go outside and the sun is not at noon, but is in the morning or in the afternoon, it's going to be at an angle. You're going to get beautiful, beautiful light from the open sky, not from the sun, from the sky. The sky is a giant softbox. Okay? So if you want to take selfies, here's some tips for taking selfies. Okay? First of all, does everybody know what the golden hour is?
The time when the sun is the brightest?
Nope.
Oh.
When the sun it gives you those soft
Make the skin look gold.
Makes the sun, makes the
Just came.
Yeah, sort of. That's not really why it's called the golden hour. I mean, that's what they're saying here on on the web. That's interesting. What is it though?
Sunset?
It's the hour before the sunset or the hour after the sun rises. So we're coming up on golden hour right now. And I guarantee you, in the summertime, between 7 and 8 o'clock, you can't take a bad picture of somebody. Like, it's almost impossible, right? People in the golden hour, you need, like forget about what this woman's wearing. Just look at the shadows. You see how even they are and how soft, right? It's because the sun is directional and the sky is illuminated, the sun is illuminated, and it's very, very pleasant. Now, these are all also, it also looks great for landscape photography, which we're not talking about, but follows similar rules. But for people, it's really, really nice. It also, this is learning to see like a camera sees. Where's the light in this?
Behind her.
It's behind her, right. If this was full sun, it would be way too bright and she would be a silhouette. It's only when the sun is going down or coming up that you can take these kinds of pictures, right? So I don't know if any of you guys are getting married or are you going to get a wedding photographer or something, but the really good ones will take you out closer to the golden hour, okay, to take your engagement pictures. But honestly, if you're getting married and you want to do it outdoors, have mercy on your guests. Do it at 4 or 5 o'clock. Nobody wants to do it at noon. All the pictures will look terrible.
Exactly.
Unless they're in the shade. Okay?
Professor,
yeah, go ahead.
I just want to say, sorry to interrupt, but like, that's actually something someone told me who was getting married. Like,
yeah,
wait until like this was in the late spring. They waited until like 5 o'clock. No, 6, 7 o'clock. They waited until around that time to start. Then, yeah, for the pictures.
Well, you know, people want to eat too. That's the problem. So you gotta worry about it. But see, when the light gets soft, it's better for the photograph. The sad fact is, cameras can't take bright light very well. And they don't see the way you see. See, you automatically fix a lot of things in a picture. When you look at a picture, you make white things white, whether they're white or not. When you look outside, right? You know, your eyes adjust and your brain adjusts, so you know when something's white and when it isn't. Cameras don't do that very well. They don't do well with a lot of contrast as well. So I actually have a picture here. Let's see if I can find it. I'll show you after. That's okay. I'll show you some stuff after that I took to show you how that works. So lighting itself can also create a mood, right? So now that you know that direction and light and the color of light all matters, the composition and the placement of things in the frame, the ability to freeze motion or not, right? Those are all elements of photography and of images, right? So if you see somebody, let me just show you something here. One more thing. The other element of photography is motion, right? So let me, with the manipulation of light, you can do all kinds of stuff, right? So look at this, right? Like, who has seen a bullet go through an apple, right? Before photography. This takes us back to those early things that we talked about, those motion studies, where photography came in handy, finding out how horses actually moved. But, you know, the only way this works is with light and shutter effects, okay? So your shutter speed, which you don't have any control over on an iPhone or a phone, is the thing that captures what has actually taken place. Now, if you want to have control with your iPhone, go into a totally dark room, get a flash or a flashlight, and then paint with light. Don't move the phone. Make sure it's on a tripod, and you can expose things so you can get these kinds of pictures. But you need a fast shutter. And you see, so it's 1/4000th of a second. Okay? My camera, the one I use, has a 1/4000th of a second shutter. Better cameras have a 1/8000th of a second shutter. Some have a 1/16,000th of a second shutter. That's quite the slice of time, right? 1/8000th of a second. And flashes, you know, your normal flash, they flash at much, much faster speeds than that. So these are taken by setting up a dark room, triggering by throwing some fruit into a tank, and the flash goes off, and it's perfectly exposed because you've set up the exposure. That's how this works. But photography can show you this, right? Where it'd be very hard to paint this without a photograph, right? It's pretty awesome. And of course, you can do these kinds of motion studies as well, right? Now, the other thing you can do is you can show the passage of time, right? Watch this. You know the stars move in the night sky, right? So these are not paintings. These are not, this is not Van Gogh. These are photographs, right? These are photographs of the stars taken by super long exposure on a camera. So 12 hours. So we've gone from 1/8000th of a second to 12 hours time, right? Now you notice some things are blurry, but it's interesting to get the stars blurry, right? And you notice the ring of light around this pond is because the movement of the moon and the stars actually illuminate it evenly over that long period of time, right? Now, does that look like a painting? Yeah, it sure does, but it's not. It's not. You can also do this with water, right? If you use a long shutter speed with water, in other words, you keep the shutter speed open, the rocks aren't moving, but the water is. And do you see how that shows the movement of the water, right? It shows it because those images are blurred, right? Because they're actually moving more than the shutter is, they're moving a lot while the shutter is open. If you want to freeze it, you use a short shutter. So water, see if we can get a sharp one. Yeah, see, look, there's a great, this is the opposite, right? Showing a wave breaking, right? With a short shutter speed. Okay? So those are the dynamics of photography, right? Composition, light, the size of the light, the direction of the light, the color of the light, the position of the light, shutter speed and time manipulation, and you put those things together and you have the elements of a language that communicates in film, right? In photography. It actually communicates different things. So looking at this wave, right, is very painterly, actually. It reminds me of Japanese, classical Japanese pictures of waves, you know, painted. But you know, it gives you a different sense than water flowing, right? Gives you a completely different sense than, than this, right? And communicates something different. Questions? Okay, there's one more effect that you guys have very little control over unless you are a professional, and that is the lens you choose, okay? The lens that you have in a phone, I don't know how to say this other than to say it, it's cheap. That doesn't mean it's not good, but it is limited by the amount of money that you're going to spend on the camera portion of your smart device. So the one in my Mac here, this 2016 Mac, it's spectacularly crappy. And the camera in it is crappy. The computer itself is very good, but I'm kind of guessing Mac, Apple didn't probably spend more than, I don't know, 99 cents on the camera portion, and maybe a few more dollars on the software portion. I don't know. It's not very much, because it's not very much part of the overall computer. Now, computers today have much, much better built-in cameras, but even if it's 10 times the amount of the cost, it's still a $10 lens, right? And it's a fixed lens too, which means you can't change it. Now, can you zoom in and out? Yeah, you can do lots of things with software, which I'm going to address when we come back from the break. But, the traditional way of creating combination compositional effects is with lens choice. And this is also true of movies, okay? So the fact is, the more telescopic your lens is, the more compressed your composition. In other words, there's less difference between the foreground and the background, right? The wider angle, the less telescopic or telephoto your lens is, the more difference there seems to be between the front and the back, and the more sense of scope there is. There's also some optical things in play here, so that, in fact, the more wide your lens, right, the more distorted the picture. Okay? So I want to show you this, because this is something else. Even a lot of photographers don't know this, right? Which is pretty wild, actually, when you think about it. This is the same guy's face, right? With two different lenses. Okay? One on the left is probably a cell phone at an edge. One on the right is maybe a 50 or 60 millimeter lens on an SLR, right? Wide angles include a lot of information, but they distort things at their edges in particular. So look at this. These are standard 35 millimeter photo lengths. And I'll show you some better pictures so you can get a sense. These are from very wide angle, 24 millimeter, up through sort of kit lens that comes with the camera at 35 or 70 millimeters, up to 135 millimeters, which is a moderate telephoto. Okay? Now, these are not absolute lengths, but it's telephoto to wide angle. Now, you might be saying, Jamie, if that 24 millimeter is a wide angle lens, how come I don't see more of the picture? How come I only see your face? And that's because these are not taken from the same distance, okay? That 24 millimeter portrait, I bet you the camera photographer's about 10 inches away from her face, okay? And the lens will distort that close, or it'll distort on the side. At 135 millimeters, to fill the frame like that, the same photographer is probably about 15 feet away. Okay? But this is something people don't understand, right? Does my face look like 35 millimeter or like 85 millimeter? It looks a lot closer to 85 millimeter. Now, what do you think you have in your camera? Wide angle or telephoto? What do you think?
Wide angle?
You have very wide angle, 2 to 4 millimeter lenses, right? And the only reason they can give you a reasonably good portrait is because a lot of stuff goes on in software, a lot of it, right? So, I mean, look at the difference between this girl's face here on the left, between 35 millimeter and 135, it looks like. Oh, 165 maybe? Yeah. I was looking for one that goes from up to 300. Yeah. But, I mean, used properly, these focal lengths work well. So you see this person, now you're starting to see what happens with the angle, right? 35 millimeter shows you more of the person's body, right? 85 millimeter doesn't show you as much. So there's less distortion when the lenses are used at their proper length, right? And that's the way it works. but you do get a lot more distortion. Here's a perfect one, right? You get a lot more distortion using a wide angle lens, right? Over here, that's on the right this time, right? That's the wide angle, than you do with a telephoto. Okay? So all of those elements are why photography is still not, I mean, even though lots of people take lots of pictures and lots of people like their pictures, that's great. There's still a lot more to creating the image you want than you might think, right? A lot more. So if you're one of those people like me, I always look bad in pictures, it's usually because the person behind the camera doesn't know what they're doing. And that says a lot about my selfies, I guess. Other selfie tips, by the way, if you want to get a good picture, do it, now, do it at the golden hour, right? We're going to take a break, go take a couple of selfies with the open sky, not the sun, but the open sky. You'll see how much better they are. Hold your camera up, right? Look up into the camera. That's always good. If you want almost a perfect environment for taking a very flattering picture of yourself, sitting in the front seat of a car is really, really good, because there's light from all sides, and it's different light from all sides. So you're closer to the front window and the side window than you are the back and the far window. And that automatically gives you a wraparound light that most photographers would pay $1 million to be able to take with them. But that's why a lot of selfies are taken in a car. Also, still not at noon, okay? Don't do it at noon. Do it when the light is soft and the sun is directional, okay? Questions? Did I lose you guys? Was that interesting at all?
That was really interesting. Thank you.
Okay, good. I'm glad somebody had the obligatory. That was interesting. Thanks, guys. I appreciate that. Okay, let's take a break. When we come back, I'm going to go into Photoshop, and hopefully you can follow along with the image that you brought. I'll show you a couple of other things. Maybe I'll illustrate these in a little better way. Yeah, we'll come back and we'll do Photoshop. Okay? Think about any questions you've got too. There's a lot of knowledge here. There's a lot of stuff to look at. So it's up to you guys.